Good evening. Just wanted to come and be with you for a minute. I haven't been on in a while. I want to talk this evening about the feast of Rosh Hashanah, Jewish celebration that God commanded back in the book of Leviticus. God, in the book of Leviticus, in verse 2, he said this to Moses. He says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, say unto them concerning the feast of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts." These feasts that God commanded, there's 7 of them. He says that they belong to him. They're not Israel's feasts. They belong to him. And he commanded that they be kept throughout all generations. First is the Feast of Passover. You'll find in verse 5 of chapter 23 of Leviticus. Exodus 12 and 6 and 14 testifies to that when God brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt with his mighty hand. He passed over the firstborn of Israel, and he took all the firstborn of Egypt. Unleavened bread is in verse 6 of chapter 23. Exodus 12 and 15 testify to that. 7 days they were supposed to be without leavened bread after the Passover. First fruits is in verse 10. They were supposed to bring the first of their fruits in. Jesus in the New Testament, now Jesus is said to be the first fruit of many. He was crucified on Passover. Unleavened bread, he was laid in the tomb. He was without sin. And then on the 3rd day he rose with all power. He is the first fruit among many. We that have become part of his body now are the many that are becoming part of his body. He is the first fruit of them. What we call Pentecost was the Feast of Weeks. God commanded 49 days after Pentecost on the 50th day. Pentecost was established back in the Old Testament. It is when God gave Israel the law. When Moses went up and got the tablets, God inscribed them with his own finger, and he brought the tablets back down. That is what we call the Feast of Pentecost. God called it the Feast of Weeks. He says here, that's verse 15, Exodus 34 and 22 testify to that. The next feast is is Rosh Hashanah, which we're celebrating today. Rosh Hashanah is called the Feast of Trumpets. God commanded them on the first day of the month of Tishri, I'll give you some background on that. That they were to blow the trumpets and call a holy convocation, and it was celebrated for 2 days. And the last feast is the next one is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Once a year, they were supposed to come and seek a forgiveness from God for the atonements of their sins. Once a year, they did that. They had to bring a lamb without spot, and they were commanded to do that once a year. The next is the Feast of Tabernacles. It is the 7th feast called Sukkot. Verse 34 testifies to that. Yom Kippur was verse 27 of Leviticus 23. And Tabernacles is in verse 34. Exodus 23 and 16 testify of that. When Israel was delivered out of Egypt and they dwelt in the wilderness, God provided their covering during that 40-year period. They dwelt and with God, the shelter God provided them. That's what that testifies to there. Rosh Hashanah literally means head of the year. It is the Jewish New Year. Although the month of Nisan is the beginning of the Jewish calendar, where Passover is celebrated, the month of Nisan reflects the fact of when God delivered Israel out of Egypt. But the month of Tishri is believed to be the month that God created the world, and is celebrated as such as being the head or the new year. It is considered the birthday of the world. So Rosh Hashanah or Yom Teruah, which means day of the shofar blast, is celebrated on the 1st and the 2nd day of the month of Tishri, which we're in right now. 7 days after Rosh Hashanah is Yom Kippur celebrated, and those 2 months together are called Yamin and Noraim, which are the days of awe in Hebrew. In English, we call them the High Holy Days. It is called the Feast of Trumpets, and the blowing of the shofar has great significance of the blowing of the trumpet, the purpose of which is to wake the soul and turn its attention to the important task of repentance, or teshuvah. This is a season of repentance. Jews take this time very seriously, a time of introspect, of examination of themselves. They look and they examine the past year. Who have I hurt? Who have I wronged? What have I done against God's law and not keeping what He has commanded us to keep? And I really examine myself. You know, Paul said in Romans 8:5, I believe it is, or 13:5, he said, examine yourself to make sure that you're even in the faith. So it's applicable then, it's applicable now. We're supposed to continually examine ourselves, but this time of year and these high holy days between Rosh Hashanah or the Feast of Trumpets and Yom Kippur or the Day of Atonement, we are to examine ourselves and make sure we haven't hurt each other, sinned against one another, nor have we sinned against God. And what the Jews do this time, they begin to look and they say, have I hurt anyone? You know, Jesus said, if you have a gift, you bring it to the altar, and you remember that you have an ought with your brother. He says, leave your gift, go take care of that ought with your brother, then come back. And right now, this is the time that the Jews do that. They reflect on how they've treated one another. It's a time of community and repentance right now for the Jews, and it should be for us as well, because, you know, Paul says we're just a wild olive branch grafted in to this Jewish community. God started the relationship with him, and without them and without their history, we don't know anything about God. So we're just grafted in, and we must be obedient to what He's called them to be obedient to as well. So it is said that when the shofar is blown, like I say, it wakes the soul and it turns our attention to a repentance. The blowing of the shofar is also a reflection of us crowning God as our King. It is also said when the shofar is blown, God will remember Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son. And He will forgive those who hear the shofar's blast. And as this reminds us to turn our hearts toward Him in repentance, it also reminds God to forgive us in our trespasses. So the high holy days and traditions hold that God decides who will live and who will die for the next year. So they take this task of examining each other very seriously.
Examining themselves.
That's it. So right now we're going to blow our shofar. To start this holiday off at sundown, the day before. The days actually start at sundown this evening, and tomorrow and the next day are the feast days. So we're going to blow the shofar. We're going to do our best. I'm not the greatest, but here we go. Amen.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. God bless you.